I'm here to just talk about building Silverlight business applications. Now, if you've been looking at Silverlight as a technology, how many of you have never heard of Silverlight? Okay, we'll need to talk to you later then. But then, yeah, Silverlight is basically a browser plugin which enables you to build really rich internet applications. If the rest of you have heard of Silverlight or seen Silverlight in action, you probably are very used to seeing some kind of rich application, either media or video or images or some kind of graphics and things that you would associate with Silverlight. Now, one of the things that we introduced in Silverlight 4, partly in Silverlight 3 actually, but then really enhanced in Silverlight 4 is this notion of building enterprise and business applications. So we've kind of put in a lot of support to actually be able to build really, really strong business applications, really strong enterprise applications. So if you are thinking of building business applications or line of business applications such as say an accounting system or a financial system or a HR management system or any kinds of intranet applications, any of these things, you could potentially think of using Silverlight, which can, which has a whole bunch of features now to enable you to build these kind of things. So what were the features that were missing in Silverlight, say Silverlight 2 or Silverlight 3 that couldn't make it really ideal for enterprise applications? Any guesses? I mean, are you guys working with Silverlight today? Not really, okay. So the guys who said you heard of Silverlight, you just seen Silverlight somewhere. Is that right? So you're not really working with Silverlight, you're not really coded in Silverlight. So how many of you have developed at least a Hello World Silverlight application? 3, okay. So I'll probably have to step back a couple of steps and just show you what the Silverlight application development looks like. Now, if you haven't worked with Silverlight, you probably are going to, probably are going to wonder why Silverlight 2 did not have certain capabilities, right? Just to get a sense, how many of you are people who worked on Visual Basic or any Microsoft platform earlier? Okay, so are you familiar with concepts like data binding and stuff like that? Yeah? So, okay, so in Silverlight 2, we couldn't potentially do a lot of those kind of things, right? Data binding, get data from the database and work with stuff and make it easy for creating grids and having various kinds of data elements or data controls. Silverlight 4 brings in a lot of that, which is why it brings in a lot of the business application friend. But I'll just step back a bit because you guys haven't worked with Silverlight that much to just show you what a Silverlight app looks like probably. So let's see if this connects. Okay, I'm not sure if we have internet here. Harish, do we have internet here? Okay, I'm connected to the wireless, but I don't think it's connected. Okay, doesn't matter. So if I say file new project, and I'm using Visual Studio 2010, but you could be using Visual Studio 2008 as well, and if you have the Silverlight tools for Visual Studio installed, what you would get when you say file new project is something called creating Silverlight applications, right? So you can say a Silverlight application project template. Now what you see here in okay, so I am connected to the internet. All right, so let's see if get through. Okay, great. So if I wanted to kind of show you what you could do with Silverlight, you basically start by, in earlier versions of Silverlight, you would actually have just these two things available, right? So you would have Silverlight application and Silverlight class library. That's what you would create. An application is basically a Silverlight app, which basically is a front-end app, and you can create various front-end UI elements there. You can wire up event handlers to these elements, and then when these event handlers are fired, you can run some code in the background, right? The entire thing, when you create a Silverlight application, the entire thing actually is downloaded to your browser and is working within your browser, right? So you are actually creating whatever you are in the browser itself. So to give you a quick example, if I created a Silverlight application, and I'm going to leave the name and all that as it is, and I'm going to say I'm going to select Silverlight 3. So the current version of Silverlight is Silverlight 4. We released Silverlight 4 just like last week. With Visual Studio 2010, you can either develop Silverlight 3 or Silverlight 4 applications. And if I pick Silverlight 3, what it also asks me is, do you want to host this Silverlight application in a new website? Now what that means is basically that it will create a project called which is a Silverlight 3 project, and then it will create a ASP.NET web application with one page, and it kind of hosts that Silverlight application into that particular page, right? So if I say this and I say OK, in a moment the solution would be created. We'll come back to the XAML file later. So this is what your solution looks like, right? So this is the Silverlight app. This whole thing is the Silverlight app, and this thing over here is the web application in which this particular Silverlight app is hosted. What does that mean? When I compile this Silverlight app, it's going to create a compiled DLL of that Silverlight app, and then create something called a zap file. I'll tell you what a zap file is in a minute, and put that in this client bin directory that you see here, right? So it compiles the Silverlight application, puts it in the client bin directory, and then you can visit one of these pages, say Silverlight application 32 test.html, and that would have the code to load up this particular Silverlight application. So let's do that. So I'm just stepping back. This is very basic Silverlight stuff. I'm just stepping back to see, to just tell you what happens in a Silverlight application. So if you say view in browser, it's a blank application. There's nothing we put in that. If you right click, you'll see that it's a Silverlight application, unlike the regular browser right click that you would see. And what basically happened here was the moment I compiled this, see this file over here. So this Silverlight application 32.xap got created, and out here in the HTML file, I actually have this piece of code. This is regular HTML code, which says that it's an object/object tag, and one of the things it has is that this is the source for that particular Silverlight object that I'm instantiating. So because my browser already has Silverlight installed, when my browser encounters this HTML page, it first encounters the object tag, and it says, oh, this is a Silverlight object. So it creates a Silverlight object with the width and height that I've specified, and then it says, okay, so this Silverlight object requires me to download this particular zap file. So the browser issues a request for the zap file, gets the zap file, and then the zap file is given to the Silverlight runtime. After that, the Silverlight runtime takes over. It instantiates stuff from the zap file and stuff. What is the zap file? It's basically, so if I open this folder in Windows Explorer, you'll see that this is a zap file. I'm going to make a copy of that zap file, and I'm going to rename it to zip, because it's basically a zip file. Okay, and if you see what it contains a DLL, which is the compiled version of the Silverlight application, and it contains a XAML file, which is basically your app manifest file, which basically describes a few things about this application. So this basically is what we put in a zip file, but we didn't want the extension to be .zip, because if you put it on a web server tomorrow, and this has to be loaded off a web server, you don't want to enable zip MIME types on a web server, because that would not only open Silverlight apps, it would open all kinds of zip files that you might have on your web server. And people like to restrict their web server MIME types. So we created a completely new MIME type called XAP, which stands for nothing really, but you can think of it as a XAML application package. Now what is XAML? So if this is what a Silverlight application is, okay so far? Yeah. Yes, so Silverlight is cross-platform and cross-browser, so it works on IE, Firefox, Safari, on Windows and on Mac. With Silverlight 4, we also support Google Chrome, so it actually works on all these browsers, on both Windows and on the Mac.
How it is different from OCX?
OCX were ActiveX controls, so basically the OCX world is very, very different in the terms that you would download an ActiveX control, and then you would actually execute this ActiveX control using the COM runtime on the local system, right? Or you would kind of have a COM container or a host which can execute COM components. This is not dependent on anything on the machine. Now you will see in a minute that Silverlight actually runs by using a core .NET framework inside it, but then it does not require you to be having .NET on that system at all. It does not reuse anything from the base system. It completely runs on its own, works on its own. It's a self-contained thing. Sorry? Yeah, so only the Silverlight plugin is required. The Silverlight plugin is what installs onto the system, and then the Silverlight plugin kind of hosts the Silverlight plugin is what contains the core .NET framework, the mini .NET framework and all that, which runs the Silverlight code, right? So it doesn't require anything else on your system except then that it needs the Silverlight plugin to be installed.
Can it read a file in a system?
Yes and no. With Silverlight 4, with Silverlight 3 actually, we provided a feature for you to, we gave you a feature called open file dialog, so you can spawn off an open file dialog and ask the user to kind of select a particular file from the system, and then you get a handle to that particular file, and you can only read that particular file. So it is a user initiated, the user has to provide you access to a file, and that dialog cannot be customized, so the user knows that he is actually giving explicit access to the application to this file, but then you can't just go and read the hard disk in general. There are a couple of other methods with which you can also get some amount of file system access, but it's again restricted. It's not like you can read the entire hard disk. So just to show you what happens in this particular Silverlight application, so we're going to, I'll just collapse the web application for a minute, and I'll just focus on the Silverlight application. Now here we have this page called mainpage.xaml, XAML. XAML is how we pronounce it. This is basically the UI representation of your Silverlight application. So this is where you have an XML based representation of the UI of your Silverlight application, and the XAML.cs file is like your code behind file. If you worked with ASP.NET, you're familiar with the code behind model. So this is similar. You have a code behind file for each of your files. So the XAML file, the code behind could also be a Visual Basic file if you selected a VB Silverlight project. The XAML file actually is where you describe your UI. So by default, you just have just a grid over here. Grid is one of the elements in one of the UI elements that you can use. So this is just an XML file, I mean an XML representation. Think of it like HTML. Today when you create web pages, HTML is your UI representation, right? You put a body tag, you put a div, you put a font tag, a bold tag, whatever. Those are your representations. This is similar. This has its own set of controls and stuff. So here, for example, I can say rectangle width is 100, height is 100, and say fill is red, and close this, right? And that puts a rectangle on the UI. So that is one very simple way of actually putting in some particular UI. Now, because this is a grid, I can put multiple elements in this. So I can put another one and make this say blue. But the way a grid works is that it actually by default positions it into the center, right? So let's say this one I reduced the width to 50. Then you can see that now there are two elements as part of that grid. I can also put columns and stuff in the grid. Now I can work in the XAML view, or I can work directly over here. So I can, for example, put a column and drag this guy into this column and this guy into this column, and have. So putting columns is like making tables in your regular HTML kind of code. So let's assume I've just put these two things and I do an F5. You will see that it actually compiles it, copies the zap, puts the zap down, and it brings it out over here. Now by default we have set all the width and height in 100% and 100%, so it takes the full available space of the browser and it automatically gets that thing. So if I were to not give it that much width and height, you would actually see that it kind of shrinks as soon as the available width becomes lesser than what width has been specified. It also works with your browser zooming and all that. So when I click the 125, 150% in your browser, it scales automatically. Silverlight automatically detects that and scales your objects automatically. So let's assume that this is one thing, and now I want to, let's say, add an event handler to this. So I'm going to go into the code view, which is the CS file, and in the CS file, this is the constructor of the C# class. So here I'm going to say, let's name our rectangles and call it X name as rectangle 1, and so X name is how you provide a name to XAML elements. You actually don't need to provide names to any XAML elements. So the X colon defines an extended property which only you are putting for your benefit. You know, it's the framework itself doesn't actually need that. So rectangle 1, I can say that when mouse enter, right, and I can say, okay, write an event handler for mouse enter, and rectangle 1 dot mouse leave. I'm going to create another mouse leave object. So so these are two event handlers, and I'm doing some basic event handling. For rectangle 2, I will probably not do that, and I'll just say mouse left button down probably, which is the left click. The right click is taken over by the Silverlight thing itself, so you can't have events against that. So this is the down thing. So on the down, let's see, let me say that rect2, I want to change the color. So let's say I want to make it dark gray, and I'll use the same thing over here, and so on mouse enter I'll make it green, and on mouse leave I'll make it back to red, and on mouse enter I'll make it green. Okay, and I do an F5. you'll see that if I move my mouse in and out, it's doing some color change over here. If I click on this, it changes the color over there. So I just did 3 simple mouse event handlers on these objects. Now what I'm showing you is like extremely basic Silverlight app, right? So just to, you get the concepts of XAML and code behind now, right? Code behind is where you kind of wire up all the events and do a whole bunch of things when various events are fired. And the XAML is where you actually kind of represent your UI. Now, I can potentially take this and also open this in another tool called Expression Blend. Expression Blend is a designer tool. It's something that I think also developers would find very handy and useful. It's a tool where you may more meant for UI designing, right? So you actually kind of do a lot of UI level designing into this particular tool. So just give it a minute to open. So you'll see that this is a very different looking tool, right? And it's more meant for designers to be working on things. I'm on an extremely low resolution, so you will see it being a little crowded because the projector I've kind of changed it to 1024. But here you can actually see that you can do a whole bunch of very visual, graphical things. So this is a very useful tool for designers because designers get a lot of tools on the right side. You can't actually see all the tools over here. So and you can take a lot of these very regular designer tools, color droppers, gradients, and a whole bunch of different regular tools that designers are used to, and actually use that to design your application. So this is when you actually make your applications a little more complex in the UI. Instead of just putting dumb rectangles, you probably want to kind of actually build out nice UIs and also get to all the various controls that are provided to you. So these are the controls that are there as part of Silverlight. So you actually have things like date pickers, and you have a whole bunch of controls. So the basic controls, the data controls, the panels, their styles, there are a whole bunch of various things you can get here. And you also have this in Visual Studio, but again in Visual Studio you'll get the very default look of it. You can take the default look and completely customize and skin the look over in something like Blend. So when you do that, you actually end up working on the XAML file. You're not working on the code file in Blend, you're only working on the XAML file. And I made one small change here in the color. So when I go back here to Visual Studio, you'll see that it says this file was modified outside. Do you want to reload it? I say yes. So you'll see that that color change actually came back over here. So if you're working with another designer, or if you're a designer working with a developer, it's a great way to actually work with Blend on one side and Visual Studio on the other side, and have a common place where you put your code and actually keep working on the files simultaneously. Because that's how I work with designers that I work with, where they're, I mean, not necessarily that you're sitting at the same time and coding at the same time. You actually can be using a source control, and you can check in, check out files from a source control, and you can check out files, you can play around the design, you can add your event handlers, code and stuff, check back in. The designer can come back later and completely change the code and stuff like that. So that is a really significant benefit that Silverlight provides you when doing this thing. So that was a quick roundup of what Silverlight can do. Now coming back to the actual topic of the thing, which I thought would have just gone off if you hadn't got that primer. So these two things and the third one are things that now are introduced in Silverlight 4, right? So we have actually in Silverlight 3 you had a version of this. In Silverlight 4 we have an enhanced version of this. What we actually now have is something called Silverlight Navigation Application and Silverlight Business Application. So Silverlight Navigation Application is basically where you actually have some sort of pages in Silverlight. So let's say you create a Silverlight application, and it has like 4 or 5 screens within that application. and you want to kind of directly link to the third screen or directly link to the first screen, you want to send a link to somebody and then when he visits it directly pops in into the third screen or something like that, right? That's when you create something called a navigation application. So we give you this feature called deep linking, and deep linking is basically the feature that says your URL and then you put a hash and you put some word. The hashtag comes into Silverlight, and if you see the hashtag, you can jump to a particular screen and stuff like that. So that's how you wire up the deep linking, and that's something that the Silverlight navigation application provided. Now, Silverlight business applications is something that works on top of the Silverlight navigation application and adds even more functionality. So the Silverlight business applications is meant for creating N-tier applications where you have data in the background, you have a database in the background, and you want to kind of show some of this data in the front end. Now, from whatever I've said, you might have realized that Silverlight is basically a client-side technology, right? So it's working in the client machine in the browser. All the execution is happening on the client. If I wanted to connect to a database, how do I do that? Sorry? Web services? Yeah. Why can I not connect directly to a database? Because it wouldn't make sense, right? Because it's there on the client machine, and you're actually running on multiple machines across the web. So you are actually running in, say you build that application, host it in a website. People visit your website, they download the Silverlight application. Thousands of people on their machines have the Silverlight application. Now they are all trying to connect back to the database. Doesn't make sense because they can't be connecting from their local machines to your SQL server. They have to connect back only to your web server because the web server is what can scale out in that sense, right? So they connect back to your web server, and then your web server connects back to your database, gets data, puts the data back, and sends it back to all these people, right? So that's the typical pattern in which you would work. Now, from what you saw in developing a Silverlight application, how many days, hours, weeks do you think you would require to create a front-end Silverlight application that actually goes and gets data from a database and shows it in form of, let's say, a grid? Any guesses? Come on, this is meant to be developer estimates. You know, developer estimates are never right anyway, so you can say any number. 1 day, 2 days? You saw how the event handling and stuff works, right? So somewhere there you probably need to first create your web service, right? Let's see what needs to be done. You need a database, you need to create a web service that talks to your database and gets some kind of data, and then presents this data in some kind of web known format, such as say SOAP or something. And then you need your Silverlight application to kind of make a call to that, get the data, and then you might not get the data in exact good structure, so you need to kind of then format it into a table or something like that. Or maybe there is a data grid control somewhere, we don't know, right? So let's try and see how much time it takes to actually create something like that. So I'm going to create a Silverlight business application. And the gentleman at the back already showed that I have only 10 minutes remaining, so I have to do it in less than 10 minutes. So this is how a Silverlight business application looks like. This is like, by default, it gives you a template with a couple of screens, a home and an about screen. By default, it actually creates that. It creates an application name and stuff like that. It's a little more complicated than the blank Silverlight project that we created earlier. So it has some a web project here, and this web project is what we'll host our web services and things like that. And then the Silverlight project will make a call to this web services. So to begin with, let's connect to data. So in the models folder, I have nothing right now. So I'm going to say add a new item. And I'm going to go to the data tab here and create something called an ADO.NET entity data model. I'm sure you've sat in some sessions that already covered this. And this is not the main thing of the thing, but just to understand, this is something that we create a schema of we look at your database and we create generate some objects that when you call these objects and collections, it actually goes back and does some, under the hood, it actually does SQL queries and stuff and talks to your database. So we kind of abstract the entire layer to you. So we are connecting to my local database. There is a database called Chinook. Chinook is a database that you can find at chinookdatabase.codeplex.com. It's a free database. It's a sample database that you can use for playing around and stuff. So it's a database that has some artists and tracks and album information. So when I go here, it shows me a bunch of tables. So I'm going to just pick one table for simplicity. I'm going to pick the album table and I'm going to say finish. So when I say finish, you would actually see that the model is created. So it's actually creating the model right now. So the model has a visual designer in Visual Studio that shows me the table that we picked. It also has all the column mappings and stuff like that over here. So you can see that it took the database int and converted it to int32 in C#. Envarchar was done as string and things like that. So basically it's created classes that map back to your table, and it's kind of an object relational mapping thing that we created. So I'll just build this project. When I build the project, it would compile these classes that just got generated. And now I have my data model ready. Now once I have my data model, so my data model is like my data access layer. Okay, it is where my objects are there that are abstracting the database. On top of that, I need to build services, right? I need to build a web service or something that exposes this data out. Again, Silverlight we provide you in this Silverlight business application template something called a domain service. So I go and say new item and I come back to web. A domain service is a ready-made service that's only meant for this purpose. It's a WCF service that is meant to take data and provide the data out here. So it generates all the required methods to get all the data, insert data and stuff like that. So it's pretty handy. So I'm going to say Chinook domain service and say add. So again, it's now generating code. It's asking you, okay, you want this domain service. Do you want client-side frameworks like Ajax or Silverlight to be able to access this? Yes, I want that, so I want that thing. If you worked with Twitter, you're probably familiar with this OData APIs and stuff. If you want OData endpoints, you just check this box. It'll also create the OData endpoints for this. It says which are the tables you want to provide in this service. There's only one table here, so I'll pick that. I'll also want editing, and I'll also associated metadata classes for this would be generated. So when I say OK, it generates all the code required for me. So this is the Chinook data service. It has an insert, get. So this has the get album thing over here, right? And in get albums, I can actually even customize the thing. So right now, it's just getting all the albums from the database. I can, for example, decide to do an order by here and say order by the title of the album, right? So this is a quick way of creating the services. Now that the service has been created, now I go to my main page XAML over here. Now I need to create a data grid that calls the service and does that thing. So I probably need to write some code, right? Not exactly, because if I go to my data sources, it looks at my project and it figures that I probably want to use my data. A domain service is usually used to expose the data. So the domain service is already being shown here, the Chinook domain context, and it is showing me that one table that is part of that. And saying, do you want to actually take this particular table and use it in some way? So this table actually has a data grid view and a details view. I'm going to take the data grid view and just drag and drop over here. So you'll see that it would have, it would generate some XAML and it would bring this thing over here. So let's position it in a okay way. Actually, I'll just leave some space here. And let's just run this. So I did an F5. So what I've done now is I've told, I saw the data sources. The data sources were basically my WCF service. I just took that and I pointed and I said, get me the data grid view out of that and put that on the Silverlight pane. The moment I did that, it actually went and actually created a data grid, and it has already done all the bindings required to call my service, get data from the database, the web service is returning it back, and it's putting it out on the Silverlight thing. So we took about 5 minutes to build this entire thing, right? Now let's actually do one more level of customization just to show that this is not just a drag and drop thing, but can be heavily customized as well. You see here that there is one method that this guy provides, which is called getAlbumsQuery. That came from the domain service class. So out here, this is the domain service class, and the domain service class had that one method called getAlbums, which is what we got as the getAlbumQuery in that particular thing. I'm going to create a second method and say iQueryable album, and I'm going to say getAlbums starting with, and put a string here that says starts with this particular thing, right? So if I do this, I'm going to now change my query to say where a dot title dot starts with Okay, so this is a quick, easy sample to understand what happens. Basically, I have created a second method here, which says getAlbum starting with, and this method takes a parameter as called starts with, right? And this is a string that we pass, and if we pass this string, it only filters the albums that are starting with that thing and only gets those things. So I'm writing a link query there to get that. Great. Now we need to build a UI which actually passes a single string and all that stuff, right? And I'd like that thing to be actually something that we provide. So I deleted that earlier data grid that we created, and instead what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, instead of the getAlbums query, I want the new method that I used, getAlbum starting with query. And I'm going to select that. I'm going to drag the data grid. Watch what happens right now. It not only put a data grid over here, it also put a text box and a button. So it figured that, and it also put a text called starts with, right? So it figured that I actually want, the tool itself figured that I actually want a string input. And it actually provided a text box by default. I can remove this text box and point it to some other data grid and say that comes from there or something. But if I leave it as it is, I should be able to run this. Hopefully the overlapping wouldn't be there. Okay, so like I expected, all these So I'm just going to create a couple of columns and drag this into this. Yeah, so I'm just creating a column so that, a row in my grid so that I can align this over here, and this guy I can probably align over here. So now if I do an F5, though my text box and stuff might still be bad, yeah, I need to do some correction there, but then if I say A and I say load, it only gets me the albums starting with A, right? So it basically ran that query with that particular thing and did that. So it's a very quick demo to show you how we've kind of integrated some tooling and integrated some stuff in Silverlight to make it quite easy. Even with very little Silverlight knowledge, you can actually start building very, very rich Silverlight business applications and work on that. So that's basically what I would have gone more deeper into this if I hadn't seen so many hands at the beginning, which was quite shocking actually for me to say, oops, I have to start a little behind. So to get started, you can get to silverlight.net or silverlight.net/RIA Services, and that's my email ID, so you can use that to get in touch with me if you have any more queries or questions. So do we have time for questions?
We have almost down the line.
Okay.
There is one question.
Yeah.
Could you explain the Silverlight use on mobile?
Silverlight on mobile. So we actually have a Silverlight runtime on the mobile for the Windows Phone, and we also have a Silverlight runtime on Symbian 60 platforms, which is basically on Nokia, LG, Samsung kind of platforms that use Symbian 60 phones, the slightly more advanced phones. And Silverlight, once you've created Silverlight applications for the web, the goal is to actually take these same applications and port them easily to the mobile device, right? So today you can actually download the, there is a Visual Studio for Windows Phone Express Edition. Okay, so you can actually search for this Visual Studio Express Edition for Windows Phone development. The regular Windows Phone UI development and everything is in Silverlight. So if you want to create applications there and all that, you would exactly use the same XAML, same code behind, same concepts that you're seeing here. Only that the framework that runs inside the phone might not be on par with the framework that we've released on the web. So right now we are on Silverlight 4 here, but this is, I think, Silverlight 2 or Silverlight 3 compatible. So you can actually kind of get Silverlight 2 code running there, but Silverlight, in any case you'll have to recompile there and then run there. But then Silverlight 4 code might not run as is because some of these controls might not be available in that runtime, right? So one of the things that you need to remember when you're creating things is that main thing that you would have to worry about is the form factor. So you would have to say, okay, the Windows Phone screen is about that much. So you would have to look at that screen and say, if I wanted to kind of show a data grid, for example, it probably doesn't make sense on a phone. You want a different kind of UI for the phone. So you probably detect to see how much screen space you have, and then you change the UI on the fly. So that's the only thing you will have to worry about. The actual Silverlight UI logic and stuff like that can remain the same in both places.
Actually, iPhone doesn't support Flash.
Yeah.
How do you see Silverlight?
iPhone doesn't support any other platform other than what iPhone provides. So today Silverlight doesn't run on iPhone either. Oh, you can actually create all of that with custom. So when you create the default Silverlight business application, it actually has a sample with some few custom objects, which does not connect to a database. So I created to a data entity because that wrapped the database, right? But those are basically nothing but C# classes. Now imagine there was no database, I would just remove this and create custom C# classes, and then I would use that. So that is, it's basically, I wouldn't have to do that one step that I did first, which was generating the ADO.NET entity model. Instead of that, I would say file new class and write my own class.